Located in Nepal, Annapurna is the 10th highest mountain in the world, among 13 other 8,000-meter peaks. The weather, local support, and technical difficulties all make this mountain one of the toughest ones to scale. The main reason why Annapurna is considered the most dangerous mountain to scale is because it is considered to be one of the most sensitive avalanche-prone areas, which adds to the technical difficulties, meaning very difficult climbing parts for the expeditions. The avalanches have taken the lives of many of the climbers that have dared to even reach its highest point. This brings in Maurice Herzog. Maurice Herzog was the leader of the French expedition that set out for Nepal in 1950, with the specific aim of making the first ascent of an 8,000-meter peak. This barrier was of fear and altitude, which was broken by Maurice, since no one in the public had attempted to even climb Annapurna or had been successful at climbing an 8,000-meter peak before. The first ascent of Annapurna made by Maurice Herzog was the first conquest of an 8,000-meter peak, which broke the barrier of altitude and fear that the public had for extreme mountain climbing, initiating more people in France to participate in such activities. The expeditioners didn't even know which mountain they wanted to climb as long as it exceeded the magic number, 8,000. While the expeditioners made their way through the Annapurna mountain chain, they came across a monk who told them about the quote-unquote where the devil Annapurna is. Of course, the expeditioners were very intrigued, so they set out to find the mountain. But after a month of exploring, they had written off one mountain as impossible and they were still looking for the other one. With the summer monsoon less than a month away, Herzog knew Annapurna would soon be laden with thick cloud and loaded with avalanche risk caused by newly fallen snow. But finally, the team decided to curl around northeast, and they found themselves staring up at Annapurna's north face, and they finally were in the position to begin climbing. After 5 weeks of exploring, they had finally found a route to the summit, but now there were only 2 weeks before the monsoon arrived. Now the goal was in their sights. The French team had to move like cheetahs. On May 23rd, they established Camp 1 at 5,100 meters on the Annapurna Glacier. I shouted, hit the ice, wheeled around in the air, pirouetted, hit the ice again, shouted once more. The rope pulled and dragged me, I suppose, to my death. This quote, said by Louis Lacanel, one of the expeditioners, said in a later interview, depicts the sheer terror that the expeditioners felt as they were on their way up to the summit. If it hadn't been for Maurice there to save him, Louis most likely would have died. The route was filled with avalanches and included camps inside crevices to protect them from the icefall. And by May 28th, they had established Camp 4 at 7,150 meters beneath a curving wall of ice they named the Sickle. Then, by June 2nd, Herzog and Lacanel and one of the Sherpas were at their high camp at 7,400 meters on the plateau, ready to attack the summit. This is where the voyage took a downhill turn. Slowly, more and more of the team decided to stay at Camp 4 than to try and make it to the summit altogether. Different factors, such as fatigue and fear of death from conditions on the mountain, all led separate members of the team to lag behind. For example, one of the Sherpas, Engthake, had already accompanied a different team of British explorers on a mountain in the Himalayas prior to the French expedition, but he decided to stay behind too with a couple other members. This shows just how terrified the grown men were at thinking that they wouldn't be able to survive the summit. Maurice even offered him the chance to accompany him to the top the following day, but Engthake refused with a simple quote, "Thank you very much, but my feet are beginning to freeze and I would prefer to go down to Camp 4. He knew that if he continued to the summit, that he would lose his feet and he wasn't willing to risk it. On the day of the summit, Herzog took a pill that had been given to him by the team's doctor to provide him with a boost of energy for the trip. The pill was a stimulant that affects the chemicals in the brain and causes hyperactivity. Herzog recalls in his novel a strong sense of euphoria on June 3rd, compared to the dullness of his partners. His partner, Lacanel, halfway up the climb to the summit from Camp 4, realized he couldn't feel his feet, and if they continued to the summit, then he would probably lose his toes to frostbite. Then suddenly, while Herzog was enjoying the climb whilst in his drug-induced haze, Lacanel grabbed him and asked, "If I go back, what will you do?" Herzog remembered him thinking that no matter what, he would make himself reach for the summit and that the same rule should apply to Lakanel, his trusted partner and friend. He responded to Lakanel with, "Today, we are consecrating an ideal, and no sacrifice is too great," essentially giving Lakanel the hint that they would not stop or turn back until they had reached the summit. At this point, Maurice was suffering from what mountaineers call summit fever, the excessive desire to reach the summit at all costs, with no regard for the consequences of continuing. Maurice finally said to Lakanel that he would go by himself, but Lakanel succumbed to Maurice and told him that he would follow him up. When they reached the summit, Maurice's euphoria still had not worn off. Maurice was like a rabid dog at the top, refusing Lakanel's pleas to go back down, shoving a camera into Lakanel and plunging the French flag into the mountaintop. At one point, when they were almost about to start heading back down, Lakanel brought out a roll of color film, and that's when Lakanel snapped, forcing Maurice to head back down. The descent of the mountain is where everything that possibly could go wrong went wrong. On the way down, Herzog took his gloves off to take something out of his pack. He made the mistake of putting them on the ground and watched them slither off the mountain. By the time the two men had reached high camp, the weather conditions were horrible, and Maurice missed the tents. They had to sleep in the snow, but luckily woke up to a sunny day. They found the high camp and woke up their team, which was planning to make it to the summit that same day. The men greeted each other while Maurice shouted, "Guys, we made it to Annapurna." As his teammate reached to shake his hand, he gasped and realized he was grasping an icicle. Suddenly, they heard yelling from below the camp and saw that Lakanel had fallen into a crevice. One of the teammates went to find him laying in the crevice, but had great difficulty getting him out. After he got him out, he had to quite literally cut through Lakanel's leather boots to be able to massage his frostbitten feet, while another team member tended to Maurice's feet in the other tent. The following day, the expedition team descended to Camp 4, but got lost in a whiteout. Since they got stuck in a whiteout, Lakanel actually fell in another crevice, but the team realized it actually provided some shelter for an overnight stay, and they huddled inside. By the morning, some of the team members were snowblind. To get to Camp 4, two invalids with frozen feet who could barely walk, one of whose hands had become frozen claws, had to lead two blind men along a trail which had become covered in fresh snow. Finally, the team reached Camp 4 and was brought down safely. Camp by camp, Sherpas came to assist the afflicted. Herzog and two of the Sherpas were caught in an avalanche and swept 150 meters down the mountain. Miraculously, they all survived and were able to continue. But the battle wasn't over when they reached base camps. As they returned across Nepal, Herzog and Lakanel were subjected to a series of painful injections by the team doctor, Jacques Udat, in the hope of saving their hands and feet. They were agonizing. Both patients screamed aloud for hours as their teammates held them tight and tried to calm them. With their limbs safe from gangrene, an infection which causes dead limbs, Udat began the amputations. To begin with, he trimmed the dead skin away with a pair of scissors, but eventually he began chopping the digits off one by one. Herzog ended up losing all his fingers and all his toes, while Lakanel had to be content with just losing his toes. For Herzog, reaching the summit of Annapurna was a triumph for the French nation. Despite his terrible injuries, he described it as a treasure on which we should live the rest of our days. For Herzog, the future was very different. His book became a worldwide bestseller and a mountaineering classic. Throughout his life, he was a French national hero, and he paved the way for how mountaineering is perceived today. From children's birthday parties to international competitions in the French Alps, extreme mountain climbing is now known as a leisure activity for many in the world. And mountain climbing wouldn't be as popular as it is today, hadn't it been for Maurice Herzog and the French expedition team of Annapurna.